Brittany, you're being way too sensitive about this. Can't you take a joke? Paraphrased. You're reacting way too emotionally to this, Brittany. Why can't you just accept a little teasing? Trevor laughed, his voice carrying across the elegant dining room of Castellanos, one of Charlotte's most expensive restaurants. Paraphrased. Trevor chuckled, his laughter echoing throughout the sophisticated dining room of Castellanos, a notably upscale restaurant in Charlotte. I sat there, my cheeks burning with embarrassment as other diners turned to look at our table. Paraphrased. I remained seated, my face flushed with shame as other people dining nearby glanced over at us. My boyfriend of 2 years and his best friend Connor had been making snide comments about my career for the past hour. Paraphrased. For the last 60 minutes, my 2-year boyfriend and his best friend Connor had been taking shots at my profession. But this latest jab felt like a slap in the face. Paraphrased. However, this most recent dig was particularly insulting. My name is Brittany Dawson. I'm 32 years old and I work as a senior marketing coordinator for Crimson Harbor Group, a thriving advertising agency in Charlotte, North Carolina. Paraphrased. I'm Brittany Dawson, 32, and I'm a senior marketing coordinator at Crimson Harbor Group, a very successful advertising agency in Charlotte, North Carolina. Just 3 days ago, I received the promotion I had been working toward for 18 months. Paraphrased. Only 3 days prior, I finally got the promotion I'd been striving for over a year and a half. I was so excited to share the news with Trevor that I suggested we celebrate at the finest restaurant in the city. Paraphrased. Eager to tell Trevor the good news, I proposed we celebrate at the most exclusive restaurant in town. What I hadn't expected was for him to invite Connor along, and I definitely hadn't expected them to spend the entire evening tearing me down. Paraphrased. I never anticipated him inviting Connor, and I certainly didn't foresee them spending the whole night criticizing me. I mean, seriously, Connor chimed in, cutting into his $40 steak that I was paying for. Paraphrased. Come on, Connor interrupted, taking a bite of the $40 steak that I was footing the bill for. Marketing coordinator sounds so fancy, but isn't it basically just making flyers and posting on social media? Paraphrased. The title marketing coordinator sounds impressive, but isn't it just about creating leaflets and sharing things online? My little sister does that for her high school drama club. Paraphrased. My younger sister performs those exact tasks for her high school's drama club. He smirked and took another bite, clearly enjoying himself. Paraphrased. He grinned and ate more of his food, obviously finding the situation quite amusing. I felt my stomach drop. Paraphrased. A wave of disappointment hit me. This was supposed to be my celebration dinner, a moment to share my joy with the person I thought loved and supported me. Paraphrased. This was meant to be a celebratory meal, a time to share my happiness with a man I believed cared for and supported me. Instead, I was watching Trevor nod along with his friend's cruel words, his eyes gleaming with amusement rather than the pride I had hoped to see. Paraphrased. Instead, I watched as Trevor agreed with his friend's nasty remarks, his eyes showing amusement instead of the pride I had hoped for. Actually, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Paraphrased. In fact, I stated, attempting to maintain a composed tone. My new role involves developing comprehensive marketing strategies for major corporate clients. Paraphrased. My new position requires me to create extensive marketing plans for significant corporate clients. I'll be managing campaigns worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and leading a team of 12 people. Paraphrased. I'll be in charge of campaigns valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars and supervising a team of 12 employees. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my wine glass, a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. Paraphrased. My hands shook a little as I reached for my wine, a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon that was more expensive than many people's weekly grocery budget. Trevor rolled his eyes dramatically. Paraphrased. Trevor sighed in a very dramatic way. Come on, babe. You're not exactly running a Fortune 500 company here. Paraphrased. Oh, please, honey. You aren't exactly the CEO of a major corporation. Let's be realistic about what you actually do. Paraphrased. Let's keep a practical perspective on your work. The condescension in his voice made my chest tighten with anger and hurt. Paraphrased. His patronizing tone made my chest feel tight with a mix of fury and sadness. I looked around the restaurant, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the soft piano music, and the other couples who seemed to be genuinely enjoying each other's company. Paraphrased. My gaze swept across the room, noticing the crystal light fixtures, the gentle piano melody, and the other pairs who seemed to be sincerely enjoying their time together. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was the only one at our table with a real job and actual income. Paraphrased. It was not lost on me that I was the only person at our table with a legitimate career and a consistent income. Yet I was the one being treated like my accomplishments meant nothing. Paraphrased. Still, I was the one being made to feel as though my achievements were worthless. Something cold and determined began to settle in my chest as I realized that this evening was showing me exactly where I stood in Trevor's life. Paraphrased. A cold sense of resolve began to form within me as I understood that tonight was revealing my true place in Trevor's life. I had met Trevor 2 years ago at a coffee shop near my apartment. Paraphrased. I first encountered Trevor 2 years ago at a coffee shop close to my home. He was charming, handsome, and had this easy confidence that drew me in immediately. Paraphrased. He was appealing, good-looking, and had an effortless self-assurance that instantly attracted me. At the time, he told me he was between opportunities, exploring his options after leaving his previous job in sales. Paraphrased. He had told me then that he was in a transitional phase, evaluating his next move after leaving his last sales job. What I didn't realize then was that between opportunities would become his permanent state of being. Paraphrased. I didn't realize at the time that his in-between state would become his permanent reality. For the past 24 months, Trevor had drifted from one failed venture to another. Paraphrased. Over the last 2 years, Trevor had moved from one unsuccessful endeavor to the next. First, it was his attempt at becoming a personal trainer, which lasted exactly 6 weeks before he decided the gym schedule was too demanding. Paraphrased. His initial attempt was to be a personal trainer, but he quit after just 6 weeks, claiming the gym schedule was too much. Then came his brief stint selling insurance, which ended when he couldn't handle the rejection that came with cold calling potential clients. Paraphrased. Following that was a short period selling insurance, which he quit because he couldn't deal with being rejected by potential customers. Most recently, he had been trying to launch a podcast about sports commentary, but he hadn't recorded a single episode in 3 months. Paraphrased. Lately, he had been attempting to start a sports commentary podcast, but he hadn't made a single recording in 3 months. Meanwhile, I had been steadily climbing the ladder at Crimson Harbor Group. Paraphrased. In contrast, I had been consistently advancing in my career at Crimson Harbor Group. I started as a junior marketing assistant, working late nights and weekends to prove myself. Paraphrased. I began as a junior marketing assistant, putting in long hours and working on weekends to establish my worth. I took on extra projects, learned new software programs on my own time, and slowly built relationships with key clients. Paraphrased. I accepted additional assignments, taught myself new software in my free time, and gradually cultivated connections with important clients. My dedication paid off when I was promoted to marketing coordinator last year. Paraphrased. My hard work was rewarded with a promotion to marketing coordinator a year ago. And now finally, I had earned the senior coordinator position that came with a substantial salary increase and real leadership responsibilities. Paraphrased. And now I had finally achieved the senior coordinator role, which brought a significant pay raise and genuine leadership duties. Remember when you used to help me with my bills? Paraphrased. Remember when you had to help me with my expenses? Trevor said now, stabbing at his asparagus with unnecessary force. Paraphrased. Trevor said, now aggressively spearing his asparagus. Now you're acting like you're some kind of corporate executive. Paraphrased. Now you're behaving as if you're a high-level business executive. It's actually pretty funny how seriously you take yourself. Paraphrased. It's quite humorous how seriously you regard yourself. Connor nodded enthusiastically. Paraphrased. Connor agreed with a vigorous nod. Right. Like we get it. Paraphrased, right? We understand. You have a job, but you don't need to act like you're changing the world with your little marketing campaigns. Paraphrased. You have a job, but there's no need to act as if your small marketing projects are changing the world. He gestured vaguely with his fork, a piece of expensive meat dangling from it. Paraphrased. He made a vague gesture with his fork, from which a morsel of pricey meat hung. I thought about all the times I had covered Trevor's rent when his latest business idea failed to generate income. Paraphrased. I recalled the many times I had paid Trevor's rent after his most recent business venture didn't make money. I thought about the groceries I bought, the utilities I paid, and the countless dinners at nice restaurants where I quietly picked up the check without making him feel bad about it. Paraphrased. I remembered buying groceries, paying for utilities, and covering the bill at numerous fancy restaurants, always discreetly so he wouldn't feel embarrassed. I had supported his dreams even when they seemed unrealistic, believing that eventually he would find his footing and we would be true partners. Paraphrased. I had supported his aspirations, even the far-fetched ones, convinced that eventually he would find his path and we would be genuine partners. You know what the best part is? Trevor continued, warming to his theme. Paraphrased. You know what's the funniest part? Trevor went on, getting more and more into his rant. She actually thinks this promotion makes her better than us, like she's too good for normal people now. Paraphrased. She genuinely believes this promotion makes her superior to us, as if she's now above ordinary people. He looked at Connor with a knowing expression that made my blood run cold. Paraphrased. He shared a look with Connor that was so smug it sent a shiver down my spine. I realized in that moment that Trevor didn't see me as his girlfriend or his partner. Paraphrased. I understood right then that Trevor didn't view me as his girlfriend or companion. He saw me as his meal ticket, someone who would fund his lifestyle while he figured out his next move. Paraphrased. He saw me as a source of money, someone who would pay for his way of life while he tried to decide what to do next. The respect and admiration I had hoped for had never existed. Paraphrased. The respect and admiration I had wished for had never been there. In his mind, my success was something to be diminished rather than celebrated because it highlighted his own failures and lack of direction. Paraphrased. He felt that my success should be downplayed instead of celebrated because it underscored his own lack of accomplishment and purpose. The waiter approached our table with a warm smile. Paraphrased. The server came to our table, smiling warmly. How is everything this evening? Can I get you anything else? Paraphrased. Is everything satisfactory tonight? Can I bring you anything else? Actually, Trevor said with a grin. Paraphrased. As a matter of fact, Trevor responded with a wide smile. We'll take another bottle of that wine, the expensive one. Paraphrased. We'll have another bottle of that very costly wine. He didn't even glance at me, just assumed I would continue playing the role of generous provider while accepting his disrespect. Paraphrased. He didn't even look at me, simply assuming I would continue to act as his generous benefactor while enduring his insults. The second bottle of wine arrived, a $90 Bordeaux that Trevor had ordered without consulting me. Paraphrased. The waiter brought another bottle of wine, a $90 Bordeaux that Trevor had selected without asking me. He poured generous glasses for himself and Connor, while barely filling mine as if I were somehow less deserving of the wine I was paying for. Paraphrased. He poured large portions for himself and Connor, barely giving me any, as if I didn't deserve the wine I was purchasing. The casual entitlement of the gesture struck me like a physical blow. Paraphrased. The blatant sense of entitlement behind his action hit me hard, like a physical strike. You know what I think, Connor said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied air of someone who had enjoyed an expensive meal at someone else's expense. Paraphrased. You know what I'm thinking, Connor said, leaning back in his seat with the smug look of someone who had just dined luxuriously on someone else's dime. I think Brittany's gotten a little too big for her britches. Paraphrased. I think Brittany's become a bit too conceited. Success has gone to her head. Paraphrased. Her success has made her arrogant. Trevor laughed loudly, drawing more stares from nearby tables. Paraphrased. Trevor laughed boisterously, causing more people at neighboring tables to stare. Oh, absolutely. Paraphrased. Oh, no doubt. Remember when she used to be fun. Paraphrased. Remember when she was a fun person to be around. Now everything's about her career this and her clients that it's exhausting. Paraphrased. Now it's all about her job and her clients. It's honestly draining. He took a long sip of wine and shook his head in mock disappointment. Paraphrased. He took a big drink of wine and shook his head with a fake look of disappointment. I felt something break inside me, a final thread of patience that had been stretched to its limit. Paraphrased. I felt something inside me snap. The last bit of my patience that had been pushed to its breaking point finally gave way. Here I was celebrating what should have been one of the happiest moments of my professional life. Paraphrased. Here I was, celebrating what should have been a very happy moment in my career. And the two people I had chosen to share it with were actively trying to tear me down. Paraphrased. And the two men I chose to share it with were intentionally trying to bring me down. The restaurant bill would likely exceed $500 by the time we finished. Paraphrased. The dinner bill would probably be more than $500 by the time we were done. Money that came entirely from my hard work and dedication. Paraphrased. That was money I earned through my own hard work and commitment. Yet I was being treated like an inconvenience. Paraphrased. Still, I was being treated as if I were a burden. I just think, Trevor continued, his voice getting louder and more animated. Paraphrased. I just think, Trevor went on, his voice growing louder and more expressive, that someone needs to remind her that at the end of the day, she's still just doing busy work. Paraphrased. That someone should remind her that, ultimately, she's still just performing menial tasks. Making PowerPoint presentations and sending emails isn't exactly brain surgery. Paraphrased. Creating PowerPoint slides and sending emails is not exactly a complex or critical job. He gestured dramatically with his wine glass, nearly knocking over the bread basket. Paraphrased. He made a dramatic motion with his wine glass, almost tipping over the basket of bread. Connor nodded sagely. Paraphrased. Connor nodded as if he were a wise sage. Exactly. Paraphrased. Precisely. And the attitude that comes with it, like we're trying to have a nice dinner here and she's sitting there all moody because we're having a little fun with her. Paraphrased. And the attitude she has because of it, as if we're trying to have an enjoyable dinner and she's just sitting there being sullen because we're having a bit of fun at her expense. If you can't handle a little friendly teasing about your job, maybe you should just go home. Paraphrased. If you can't handle a little playful teasing about your work, maybe you should just leave. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Paraphrased. The words lingered in the air as if they were a dare. Trevor looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to apologize, to laugh along with their jokes, to shrink back into the supportive role he expected me to play. Paraphrased. Trevor stared at me, anticipating that I would apologize, join in their laughter, or retreat back into the supportive role he expected. The restaurant continued to buzz with conversation around us, other couples and families enjoying their evening while unaware of the drama unfolding at our table. Paraphrased. The restaurant remained lively with chatter, as other couples and families had a good time, completely oblivious to the tense situation at our table. I looked at Trevor's face, really looked at it, and saw clearly for the first time who he really was. Paraphrased. I gazed at Trevor's face, truly examining it, and for the first time I saw his true nature. He wasn't the charming man I had fallen for 2 years ago. Paraphrased. He wasn't the appealing man I had been so drawn to 2 years earlier. He was a man-child who resented my success because it highlighted his own failures. Paraphrased. He was a childish man who felt bitter about my success because it made his own lack of achievement more obvious. He was someone who felt threatened by my accomplishments rather than proud of them. Paraphrased. He was a person who was intimidated by my achievements instead of being proud of them. And most damaging of all, he was someone who would tear me down in public to make himself feel better. Paraphrased. And worst of all, he was someone who would humiliate me in public just to boost his own ego. You know what? I said quietly, setting down my wine glass with deliberate care. Paraphrased. You know what? I said softly, placing my wine glass on the table with great care. You're absolutely right. Paraphrased. You are completely correct. I reached for my purse, my movements calm and controlled, despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. Paraphrased. I moved calmly and deliberately to grab my purse, even though I was an emotional wreck on the inside. Maybe I should go. Paraphrased. Perhaps I should leave. Trevor's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion as I stood up from the table. Paraphrased. When I rose from the table, Trevor's smug look changed to one of confusion. He had expected me to back down, to laugh off their insults, and continue playing the role of the compliant girlfriend who financed their good times. Paraphrased. He had assumed I would give in, shrug off their taunts, and continue being the agreeable girlfriend who paid for their enjoyment. Instead, I calmly opened my purse and pulled out my wallet. Paraphrased. Instead, I calmly took out my wallet from my purse. Wait, what are you doing? Trevor asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. Paraphrased. Hold on, what are you doing? Trevor asked, a note of uncertainty in his voice. The confident smirk had disappeared from his face, replaced by a flicker of concern. Paraphrased. The arrogant smirk was gone from his face, replaced with a hint of worry. I'm taking your excellent advice, I replied, my voice steady and clear. Paraphrased. I'm following your brilliant suggestion, I answered, my voice firm and clear. You said if I couldn't handle your friendly teasing, maybe I should go home, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. Paraphrased. You told me that if I couldn't handle your little jokes, I should just go home, and that's precisely what I intend to do. I placed $30 on the table, enough to cover my glass of wine and a generous tip for our server. Paraphrased. I put $30 on the table, which was sufficient for my wine and a nice tip for the server. The rest of the bill, I realized with grim satisfaction, would be Trevor and Connor's responsibility. Paraphrased. The remainder of the bill, I realized with grim pleasure, would be for Trevor and Connor to handle. The appetizers they had ordered, the expensive steaks, the 2 bottles of wine, the dessert menu they had been eyeing for the past 10 minutes, all of it would be their problem to solve. Paraphrased. The appetizers, the pricey steaks, the 2 bottles of wine, and the dessert they had been looking at for the last 10 minutes. All of it was now their responsibility. Brittany, come on, Trevor said, reaching for my arm. Paraphrased. Brittany, please, Trevor said, trying to grab my arm. Don't be dramatic. Paraphrased. Don't be so over the top. We were just joking around. Paraphrased. We were only kidding. We don't really mean any of that stuff. Paraphrased. We didn't really mean any of those things. I pulled my arm away from his grasp and looked down at him with a calmness that surprised even me. Paraphrased. I pulled my arm away from him and looked down at him with a composure that even I found surprising. The thing is, Trevor, I don't think you were joking. Paraphrased. The truth is, Trevor, I don't believe you were kidding. I think you meant every word, and I think you've been feeling this way about my career for a long time. Paraphrased. I think you meant everything you said and that you've felt this way about my job for a long time. Tonight was just the first time you felt comfortable saying it out loud. Paraphrased. Tonight was simply the first time you felt safe enough to say it to my face. Connor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally realizing that the situation had taken a serious turn. Paraphrased. Connor fidgeted in his seat, finally understanding that the situation had become serious. Hey, maybe we all got a little carried away here. Why don't we just order dessert and call it even? Paraphrased. Hey, perhaps we all went a bit too far. How about we just order some dessert and put this all behind us? Call it even. I repeated, letting out a short laugh. Paraphrased. Put this all behind us? I repeated, letting out a humorless laugh. You spent the entire evening mocking my career, my ambitions, and my success. Paraphrased. You spent the whole night making fun of my job, my goals, and my achievements. And you think we can call it even over dessert. Paraphrased. And you believe we can just forget about it all by ordering dessert. That's not how this works. Paraphrased. That's not how things are done. The waiter appeared at our table, sensing the tension, but maintaining his professional demeanor. Paraphrased. The server returned to our table, sensing the tense atmosphere but remaining professional. Is everything all right here? Can I get you anything else? Paraphrased. Is everything okay? Can I get you anything more? Actually, I said, turning to him with a smile. Paraphrased. Actually, I said, turning to him with a pleasant expression. These gentlemen will be handling the check this evening. Paraphrased. These gentlemen will be taking care of the bill tonight. I was just leaving. Paraphrased. I was just on my way out. Trevor's face went pale. Paraphrased. Trevor's face turned a ghostly white. Brittany, wait. Paraphrased. Brittany, hold on. You can't just leave us here. Paraphrased. You can't simply abandon us here. You know I don't have that kind of money right now. Paraphrased. You're aware that I don't have that much money at the moment. My credit card is maxed out from that equipment I bought for the podcast. Paraphrased. My credit card is at its limit because of the gear I purchased for the podcast. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Paraphrased. The statement hung in the air like a secret revealed. Here was the truth I had been avoiding for months. Paraphrased. The reality I had been ignoring for months was now out in the open. Trevor wasn't just between jobs. Paraphrased. Trevor wasn't just unemployed temporarily. He was financially irresponsible and completely dependent on me for everything. Paraphrased. He was financially reckless and relied on me for everything. The podcast equipment he mentioned had cost over $800 and had been sitting unused in his apartment ever since. Paraphrased. The podcast equipment he had talked about had cost more than $800 and had been sitting idle in his apartment since he got it. That sounds like a personal problem, I said, adjusting my purse strap on my shoulder. Paraphrased. That sounds like an issue for you to deal with, I said, repositioning my purse on my shoulder. I'm sure two resourceful men like yourselves can figure something out. Paraphrased. I'm sure two clever men like you can find a solution. After all, according to you, what I do for work is so easy that anyone could do it. Paraphrased. After all, you said that what I do for a living is so simple that anyone could do it. Maybe you should try calling your boss and asking for an advance on your salary. Paraphrased. Maybe you should try calling your boss and requesting an advance on your pay. Oh wait, you don't have a boss or a salary. Paraphrased. Oh right, you don't have a boss or a salary. Connor's eyes darted between Trevor and me, clearly calculating the cost of the meal and realizing he was about to be stuck with a bill he couldn't afford either. Paraphrased. Connor's eyes nervously moved from Trevor to me, as he quickly figured out the cost of the meal and realized he couldn't afford his part of the bill either. Look, this got out of hand. Paraphrased. Listen, this went too far. Can't we just talk about this like adults? Paraphrased. Can't we just discuss this maturely? We are talking about it like adults, I replied. Paraphrased. We are talking about it like adults, I responded. Adults take responsibility for their choices and their words. Paraphrased. Grown-ups accept the consequences of their actions and words. Tonight, you both chose to spend 2 hours insulting me and dismissing my accomplishments. Paraphrased. Tonight you both chose to spend 2 hours belittling me and my achievements. Now you get to choose how you're going to pay for the meal you ordered. Paraphrased. Now you get to decide how you're going to pay for the dinner you ordered. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter around us, though I wasn't sure if it was real or just my heightened awareness of the moment. Paraphrased. The restaurant seemed to become quieter, although I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or if the noise level had actually dropped. Other diners were definitely watching our table now, drawn by the obvious tension and raised voices. Paraphrased. Other diners were clearly now observing our table, drawn by the palpable tension and our rising voices. I could see a well-dressed couple at the table next to us exchange glances, and an older woman by the window had stopped eating entirely to observe our drama. Paraphrased. I saw a nicely dressed couple at the next table look at each other, and an older woman by the window had stopped eating completely to watch our dramatic scene. "Brittany, please," Trevor said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a persuasive whisper. Paraphrased. "Brittany, come on," Trevor said, his voice lowering to what he likely thought was a convincing whisper. "You're embarrassing me. People are staring." Paraphrased. "You're humiliating me. People are looking." "I'm embarrassing you?" I asked, letting my voice carry just enough that our neighbors could hear. Paraphrased. "I'm embarrassing you?" I asked, making sure my voice was loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You spent the last 2 hours trying to humiliate me in front of your friend and anyone else within earshot." Paraphrased. "You spent the last 2 hours trying to make me look foolish in front of your friend and anyone else who could hear. You told me my job was worthless, that I was acting above my station, and that I couldn't take a joke." Paraphrased. "You said my job was pointless, that I was acting too high and mighty, and that I couldn't handle a joke. But now I'm the one causing embarrassment." Paraphrased. "But now I'm the one who's creating a scene." Trevor's jaw clenched as he realized his attempt at manipulation had backfired. Paraphrased. Trevor's jaw tightened as he realized his effort to manipulate me had failed. "You're making a scene over nothing." Paraphrased. "You're creating a big drama over something small. We were having a conversation." Paraphrased. "We were just having a discussion. Maybe it got a little heated, but this is completely over the top." Paraphrased. "Maybe it got a bit tense, but this reaction is totally excessive." "A conversation," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. Paraphrased. "A discussion," I said again, my voice getting a little louder. "Is that what you call spending an entire evening tearing down your girlfriend's achievements?" Paraphrased. "Is that what you call spending a whole night criticizing your girlfriend's accomplishments? Because where I come from, we call that something else entirely." Paraphrased. "Because in my book, that's called something else entirely." Connor finally found his voice. Paraphrased. Connor finally spoke up, though he sounded significantly less confident than he had earlier. Paraphrased, however, he sounded much less self-assured than he had before. "Look, maybe we were a little harsh." Paraphrased. "Listen, maybe we were a bit mean. Guys give each other crap all the time, and sometimes we forget that women are more sensitive about these things." Paraphrased. "Guys are always giving each other a hard time, and we sometimes forget that women are more sensitive about these matters." The condescension in his words was breathtaking. Paraphrased. The patronizing tone of his words was astounding. Even now, faced with the consequences of their behavior, he was doubling down on the idea that I was the problem for being too sensitive rather than acknowledging that they had been cruel and disrespectful. Paraphrased. Even now, facing the fallout of their actions, he insisted that I was the one at fault for being too sensitive, instead of admitting that their behavior was cruel and disrespectful. "More sensitive?" I asked, turning my full attention to Connor. Paraphrased. "More sensitive?" I asked, focusing all my attention on Connor. "Or maybe women just have higher standards for how they expect to be treated by people who claim to care about them." Paraphrased. "Or perhaps women simply expect a higher standard of treatment from people who say they care about them." The waiter returned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but needing to address the practical matter at hand. Paraphrased. The server came back, clearly uneasy, but needing to address the business at hand. "Excuse me, but will you be staying for dessert? And should I bring the check now?" Paraphrased. "Pardon me, but will you be having dessert? And should I bring the bill now?" "Yes, please bring the check," I said before Trevor could answer. Paraphrased. "Yes, please bring the check," I said before Trevor had a chance to reply. "These gentlemen are ready to settle up." Paraphrased. "These gentlemen are prepared to pay." Trevor's face had gone from pale to red, a flush of anger and panic that made him look younger and more desperate than I had ever seen him. Paraphrased. Trevor's face had gone from white to red, flushed with a mix of anger and panic that made him appear younger and more frantic than I had ever seen. "You can't do this." Paraphrased. "You can't leave. It's not fair." Paraphrased. "This isn't right. I invited you out to celebrate your promotion, and this is how you repay me." Paraphrased. "I took you out to celebrate your promotion, and this is how you treat me in return." The revisionist history was almost laughable. Paraphrased. His attempt to rewrite history was almost comical. "You invited me out." Paraphrased. "You invited me out." Trevor, I made the reservation." Paraphrased. "Trevor, I booked the table." "I suggested the restaurant." Paraphrased. "I proposed this restaurant. I was excited to share my good news with you, and you decided to use the opportunity to tear me down instead of building me up." Paraphrased. "I was thrilled to share my good news with you, and you decided to use the chance to criticize me instead of offering support. The fact that you can't see the difference between those two things tells me everything I need to know about our relationship." Paraphrased. "The fact that you can't tell the difference between those two things reveals everything about our relationship that I need to know. I could feel the eyes of the restaurant staff on us now." Paraphrased. "I could feel the restaurant staff looking at us. Our server was hovering nearby with the check, clearly waiting for the right moment to approach." Paraphrased. "Our server was standing close by with the bill, obviously waiting for a good time to come over. The hostess had moved closer to our section, probably preparing to intervene if the situation escalated further." Paraphrased. "The hostess had moved nearer to our table, probably ready to step in if things got worse." "This is insane," Trevor muttered, running his hands through his hair. Paraphrased. "This is crazy," Trevor whispered, running his hands through his hair. "You're destroying 2 years of our relationship over one dinner." Paraphrased. "You're ending our 2-year relationship over a single dinner." "No," I said quietly. Paraphrased. "No," I said softly. "You destroyed our relationship over one dinner." Paraphrased. "You are the one who destroyed our relationship at this one dinner. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen." Paraphrased. "I'm simply refusing to act like it didn't occur." The check arrived with impeccable timing, as if the waiter had been waiting for a break in our conversation. Paraphrased. The bill arrived with perfect timing, as if the waiter had been waiting for a pause in our conversation. He placed the black leather folder discreetly on the table between Trevor and Connor, then stepped back with the practiced grace of someone who had witnessed many uncomfortable dining situations. Paraphrased. He subtly placed the black leather folder on the table between Trevor and Connor, then backed away with the polished poise of someone who had seen many awkward dining situations. Trevor stared at the folder as if it contained a bomb. Paraphrased. Trevor looked at the folder as if it were a bomb. His hands remained frozen on the table, making no move to reach for it. Paraphrased. His hands remained motionless on the table, making no attempt to grab it. Connor glanced between the check and Trevor, clearly hoping his friend would take charge of the situation. Paraphrased. Connor's eyes darted between the check and Trevor, clearly hoping his friend would handle the situation. But Trevor seemed paralyzed by the reality of what was happening. Paraphrased. But Trevor seemed frozen by the reality of the moment. $567. Paraphrased. $567. Connor read aloud after finally opening the folder, his voice barely above a whisper. Paraphrased. Connor read out loud after finally opening the folder, his voice barely a whisper. Plus tip. Paraphrased. Plus tip. The number hung in the air like a verdict. Paraphrased. The total lingered in the air like a final judgment. I knew exactly how much money Trevor had in his checking account because he had complained about it just last week when his rent was due. Paraphrased. I knew exactly how much money was in Trevor's bank account because he had complained about it just the week before when his rent was due. It was less than $200. Paraphrased. It was less than $200. Connor wasn't much better off. Paraphrased. Connor wasn't in a much better financial position. He worked part-time at a sporting goods store and still lived with his parents at 29. Paraphrased. He had a part-time job at a sporting goods store and, at 29, he still lived with his parents. Well, I said cheerfully. Paraphrased. Well, I said with a smile. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Paraphrased. I'm confident you'll find a solution. Maybe you can wash dishes. Paraphrased. Maybe you can do the dishes. I hear restaurants sometimes offer that as an alternative payment method. Paraphrased. I've heard that some restaurants allow you to pay by washing dishes. Trevor's head snapped up. His eyes wide with something between rage and desperation. Paraphrased. Trevor's head shot up. His eyes wide with a mix of fury and hopelessness. You wouldn't actually leave us here like this. Paraphrased. You can't seriously be leaving us here like this. Not really. Paraphrased. Not for real. This is just you making a point, right? Paraphrased. You're just trying to prove a point, aren't you? You're going to come back and pay after you've had your moment. Paraphrased. You're going to come back and pay after you've had your little moment. The hope in his voice was almost pathetic. Paraphrased. The flicker of hope in his voice was almost pitiful. He still couldn't believe that his actions had real consequences, that his words had pushed me past the point of no return. Paraphrased. He still couldn't grasp that his behavior had genuine consequences, that his insults had pushed me past my limit. Even now, he expected me to be the responsible one, to clean up his mess and pretend everything was fine. Paraphrased. Even at this moment, he expected me to be the responsible one, to fix his problem and act like nothing was wrong. Oh, I'm definitely leaving, I assured him. Paraphrased. Oh, I am absolutely leaving, I confirmed. The only question is whether you call your parents for help, figure out a payment plan with a restaurant manager, or start looking for those rubber gloves in the kitchen. Paraphrased. The only question is whether you'll call your parents, work out a payment plan with a manager, or start searching for those rubber gloves in the kitchen. I started walking toward the exit, feeling lighter with each step. Paraphrased. I began walking toward the door, feeling a sense of lightness with every step. Behind me, I could hear Trevor calling my name. His voice getting more desperate and angry. Paraphrased. Behind me, I could hear Trevor yelling my name. His voice growing more panicked and furious. Other diners were definitely staring now, some with disapproval, and others with barely concealed amusement at the drama unfolding before them. Paraphrased. Other diners were clearly staring now, some with a look of disapproval, and others with thinly veiled amusement at the scene. Brittany! Trevor shouted loud enough that conversations throughout the restaurant paused. Paraphrased. Brittany! Trevor yelled loudly enough that conversations all over the restaurant stopped. You can't just walk away from this from us. Paraphrased. You can't just leave all of this, leave us. I stopped at the hostess station and turned back one final time. Paraphrased. I paused at the hostess stand and turned back one last time. Trevor was half standing, his chair pushed back. His face flushed with embarrassment and fury. Paraphrased. Trevor was halfway out of his chair, which was pushed back. His face red with shame and anger. Connor remained seated, staring at the check as if willing the numbers to change. Paraphrased. Connor stayed in his seat, staring at the bill as if he could make the numbers disappear. Actually, I called back, my voice carrying clearly across the dining room. Paraphrased. Actually, I called back, my voice carrying clearly across the dining room. Can walk away from this. Paraphrased. I can, in fact, walk away from this. I can walk away from someone who sees my success as a threat instead of a celebration. Paraphrased. I can leave a person who views my success as a threat instead of a reason to celebrate. I can walk away from someone who thinks it's funny to humiliate me in public. Paraphrased. I can walk away from a person who thinks it's amusing to embarrass me in public. And I can definitely walk away from someone who expects me to fund his lifestyle while he contributes nothing but criticism and complaints. Paraphrased. And I can certainly walk away from a person who expects me to pay for his life while he offers nothing but complaints and insults. The hostess gave me a subtle nod of approval as I headed for the door. Paraphrased. The hostess gave me a small, approving nod as I walked to the door. "Have a wonderful evening," she said quietly, and I could hear the sincere support in her voice. Paraphrased. "Have a wonderful evening," she said softly, and I could hear the genuine support in her tone. "I intend to," I replied, stepping out into the cool Charlotte evening air. Paraphrased. "I plan to," I replied, walking out into the chilly night air of Charlotte. As the restaurant door closed behind me, I could hear raised voices from inside. Paraphrased. As the door to the restaurant shut, I could hear shouting from inside. But I didn't look back. Paraphrased. But I didn't turn around. For the first time in months, I felt completely free. Paraphrased. I felt an incredible sense of freedom for the first time in months. The walk to my car felt like floating. Paraphrased. My walk to the car felt like I was floating. Each step carried me further away from 2 years of making excuses for Trevor's behavior, of minimizing his failures and supporting his dreams while he undermined mine. Paraphrased. Every step I took brought me farther away from 2 years of justifying Trevor's actions, downplaying his failures, and supporting his ambitions while he chipped away at mine. The cool October air in Charlotte felt refreshing against my skin, washing away the stuffiness of the restaurant and the toxic atmosphere Trevor and Connor had created. Paraphrased. The brisk October air in Charlotte was a welcome relief against my skin, clearing away the stuffy restaurant air and the toxic vibe Trevor and Connor had created. I pulled out my phone as I reached my car and saw 3 missed calls from Trevor already. Paraphrased. When I got to my car, I took out my phone and saw that Trevor had already called 3 times. Then, as I watched, Connor's name appeared on my screen. Paraphrased. Then, as I watched, Connor's name showed up on my screen. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately blocked both of their numbers. Paraphrased. I let the call go to voicemail, then promptly blocked both of their numbers. Whatever desperate pleas or angry accusations they wanted to hurl at me could stay trapped in that restaurant with them. Paraphrased. Any desperate pleas or angry insults they wanted to throw at me could remain trapped with them in that restaurant. The drive home took me through the heart of Charlotte's financial district, past the gleaming towers where I had interviewed for my promotion just 3 weeks ago, the same buildings that Trevor had dismissed as corporate nonsense when I excitedly told him about the opportunity. Paraphrased. My drive home took me through the center of Charlotte's financial district, past the shining skyscrapers where I had my promotion interview just 3 weeks prior. The very same buildings Trevor had brushed off as corporate absurdity when I excitedly told him about the opportunity. Looking at them now, I felt a surge of pride that no one could take away from me. Paraphrased. As I looked at them now, I felt a wave of pride that no one could diminish. My apartment felt like a sanctuary when I walked through the door. Paraphrased. My apartment felt like a refuge as I entered the door. I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I had been saving for a special occasion, and settled onto my couch with my laptop. Paraphrased. I kicked off my shoes, poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I had been saving, and sat down on my couch with my laptop. If Trevor thought my work was so trivial, he was about to learn exactly how valuable my professional skills really were. Paraphrased. If Trevor considered my job to be so insignificant, he was about to find out exactly how valuable my professional skills truly were. I opened my social media accounts and began crafting posts about the evening's events. Paraphrased. I logged into my social media accounts and started creating posts about what had happened that night. Not angry rants or emotional outbursts, but carefully worded professional observations about recognizing your worth and refusing to accept disrespect. Paraphrased. Not angry rants or emotional breakdowns, but thoughtfully phrased, professional observations about knowing your value and not putting up with disrespect. Within minutes, colleagues and friends were responding with support and their own stories of similar experiences. Paraphrased. Within minutes, friends and colleagues were commenting with messages of support and sharing their own similar experiences. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Paraphrased. My phone vibrated with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Trevor had borrowed someone else's phone to message me. Paraphrased. Trevor had used someone else's phone to text me. You're going to regret this. Nobody will want to date someone who abandons people over a dinner bill. Paraphrased. You'll be sorry for this. No one will want to go out with someone who leaves people over a dinner bill. I screenshotted the message and added it to my post with a caption. And here's the follow-up harassment when someone doesn't get their way. Paraphrased. I took a screenshot of the text and added it to my post with a caption. And here's the harassment you get when someone doesn't get what they want. The next morning brought a flood of messages from friends, colleagues, and even distant acquaintances who had seen my social media posts. Paraphrased. The following morning, my phone was filled with messages from friends, co-workers, and even people I barely knew who had seen what I posted online. The response was overwhelming and universally supportive. Paraphrased. The reaction was incredibly positive and supportive. Women shared their own stories of partners who had tried to diminish their accomplishments, and men offered perspectives on what healthy relationships actually looked like. Paraphrased. Women shared stories of partners who had tried to belittle their accomplishments, and men offered their views on what healthy relationships were like. My friend Jessica called me during my lunch break at work. Paraphrased. My friend Jessica called me on my lunch break at work. Girl, I have been waiting 2 years for you to see what the rest of us saw about Trevor. Paraphrased. Girl, I have been waiting 2 years for you to finally see what we all saw about Trevor. He was bleeding you dry financially and emotionally. Paraphrased. He was draining you financially and emotionally. I can't believe I stayed that long, I admitted, though I felt relief rather than regret. Paraphrased. I can't believe I put up with it for so long, I admitted, feeling relieved instead of regretful. You loved him and you wanted to believe he could change. Paraphrased. You loved him and you wanted to believe that he would change. That makes you human, not stupid. Paraphrased. That just makes you a human, not a fool. Around 3:00 p.m., my coworker David stopped by my desk with news. Paraphrased. Around 3 p.m. my coworker David came by my desk to tell me something. You're not going to believe this, but Connor works at that sporting goods store in my neighborhood. Paraphrased. You won't believe this, but Connor works at the sporting goods store in my neighborhood. I went by there today and apparently he had to call in sick because he and some friends spent 4 hours washing dishes at a fancy restaurant last night to pay off a bill. Paraphrased. I went there today and apparently he had to call in sick because he and his friends spent 4 hours washing dishes at a fancy restaurant last night to pay for a bill. I couldn't help but laugh. Paraphrased. I couldn't help but laugh. 4 hours. Paraphrased. 4 hours. The bill was only about $600 with tip. Paraphrased. The bill was only about $600 with the tip. Apparently they're not very efficient dishwashers. Paraphrased. Apparently they're not very good at washing dishes. My friend who works there said they look like they'd never seen the inside of a kitchen before. Paraphrased. My friend who works there said they looked like they had never been in a kitchen before. That evening, I received a friend request on social media from the hostess at Castellanos. Paraphrased. That night I got a social media friend request from the hostess at Castellanos. Her message was brief but meaningful. Paraphrased. Her message was short but very meaningful. I've been working in restaurants for 8 years, and what you did last night was the most epic response to terrible behavior I've ever witnessed. Paraphrased. I've worked in restaurants for 8 years, and what you did last night was the most spectacular response to bad behavior I've ever seen. You're my hero. Paraphrased. You're my hero. The validation from a complete stranger meant more than I expected. Paraphrased. The approval from a total stranger was more impactful than I had anticipated. She had seen everything unfold and recognized that I had stood up for myself rather than causing unnecessary drama. Paraphrased. She had watched the whole thing happen and understood that I was defending myself instead of creating a pointless scene. Trevor's desperate attempts to contact me continued throughout the week, but each blocked number and deleted voicemail only reinforced that I had made the right choice. Paraphrased. Trevor kept trying to reach me all week, but every time I blocked his number or deleted a voicemail, it only confirmed that I had done the right thing. His entitlement knew no bounds. Paraphrased. His sense of entitlement was limitless. But fortunately, my tolerance for it had finally reached its limit. Paraphrased. But thankfully, my patience for it had finally run out. Trevor and Connor faced immediate and lasting consequences for their behavior that night. Paraphrased. Trevor and Connor faced immediate and long-term repercussions for their actions that evening. Trevor had to borrow money from his disapproving parents to cover his share of the restaurant bill, leading to a humiliating conversation about his financial irresponsibility and dependence on others. Paraphrased. Trevor was forced to ask his parents for a loan to pay for his part of the bill, which resulted in a shameful discussion about his financial recklessness and reliance on others. When word spread through their social circle about what had happened, several mutual friends distanced themselves from Trevor, recognizing the pattern of disrespect and entitlement they had previously overlooked. Paraphrased. When the story of what happened spread through their group of friends, several mutual acquaintances stopped spending time with Trevor, finally seeing the pattern of disrespect and entitlement they had once ignored. Connor lost his part-time job at the sporting goods store after calling in sick without proper notice, and his reputation in our shared social network was permanently damaged. Paraphrased. Connor lost his part-time job at the sporting goods store for calling in sick without proper notice, and his reputation in our mutual social circle was permanently ruined. Both men found themselves facing the reality that their attitudes toward successful women had cost them relationships and respect in their community. Paraphrased. Both men were forced to confront the fact that their disrespectful attitudes toward successful women had cost them their relationships and respect within their community. Trevor's attempts to paint me as unstable or vindictive fell flat when people learned the full story of his behavior that evening. Paraphrased. Trevor's efforts to portray me as crazy or vengeful failed when people found out about his behavior that night. As I settled into my new role as senior marketing coordinator, managing my expanded team and developing strategies for major clients, I realized that walking away from Trevor had been about more than just one disastrous dinner. Paraphrased. As I got comfortable in my new role as senior marketing coordinator, managing my larger team and creating strategies for major clients, I realized that leaving Trevor was about more than just one terrible dinner. It had been about finally valuing myself enough to demand the respect I deserved, both personally and professionally. Paraphrased. It was about finally appreciating myself enough to insist on the respect I deserved, both in my personal life and at work. Looking back on that night, I felt grateful for Trevor's suggestion that I should leave. Paraphrased. Thinking back on that night, I was thankful for Trevor's suggestion that I should go. It had been the best advice he ever gave me, even if he hadn't meant it that way. Paraphrased. It was the best advice he had ever given me, even if he hadn't intended for it to be.